They're my children, not your scandal. A black woman, a fierce single mother and self-taught coder, stands defiant in a glittering ballroom, her twins clutching her hands as whispers cut like knives. She's faced it all, sneering glances, patronizing remarks like, raising kids like that must be tough, and the sting of being called out of place at a wedding meant to celebrate love. Yet in this moment, her strength is a beacon, her eyes blazing against a sea of judgment. One unexpected encounter will unravel a past she buried to protect her children, forcing a man to confront his regrets. Will love and presence triumph over prejudice? Welcome to Elite Romance. Subscribe and hit the bell to catch our latest tales of courage. Share where you're watching from in the comments. Can one night rewrite a broken story? Stay to find out. The ballroom shimmered under chandeliers that dripped light like molten gold, a dazzling stage for a wedding that screamed wealth and tradition. At its edge stood a black woman, 27 years old, her hands clasped tightly around the small, sticky fingers of her 5-year-old twins. Her emerald dress, a thrift store gem she'd stitched into elegance with her own hands, hugged her frame with quiet defiance. Her curls framed a face that held both pride and weariness, eyes sharp enough to cut through the polite facades around her. She was a self-taught coder, a single mother who'd built a life from scratch. But tonight, she felt the weight of every glance. The twins, a boy and a girl, clung to her, their tiny, formal outfits slightly wrinkled from an hour of fidgeting in the car. They were here because of Lena, her best friend, the bride whose laughter now echoed across the room. Lena had insisted, "Bring them. They're family." No babysitter had been available, so here they were, three outsiders in a sea of privilege. The air was thick with the scent of roses and champagne, but beneath the celebration lurked something sharper. A woman in a pearl necklace, her smile as polished as her jewelry, leaned toward the mother and murmured, "Raising mixed kids alone must be quite the challenge, don't you think?" The words were cloaked in concern, but they landed like a slap, each syllable laced with the assumption that she was somehow less capable, less suited for this role. She forced a smile, her lips a tight line, and nodded. "We manage," she said, her voice steady but cold. Inside she burned. She'd heard it all before. The veiled judgments, the whispers that her children, with their warm brown skin and tight curls, didn't quite fit in places like this. She'd faced worse. Colleagues who assumed she was the office assistant rather than the lead on a coding project. Neighbors who raised eyebrows when she moved into their nice apartment complex. Strangers who asked, "Where's their father?" as if her family's completeness depended on a man. The twins tugged at her hands, their eyes wide with the wonder of the glittering room. The girl in a poofy lavender dress pointed at a towering cake adorned with sugar flowers. "Mommy, can we eat that?" she asked, her voice a bright chime against the low hum of adult chatter. The boy, his bow tie slightly askew, clutched a stuffed dinosaur and stared at a waiter balancing a tray of sparkling drinks. Their innocence was her anchor, grounding her against the tide of scrutiny. She knelt to their level, smoothing the boy's collar. "Soon, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's find Aunt Lena first." She stood, scanning the crowd for her friend, the one person who'd never made her feel like she had to prove her worth. Across the room, a man in a tailored navy suit stood alone, his whiskey glass untouched. At 30, he was a tech entrepreneur, his name synonymous with innovation and ambition. His sharp jaw and piercing blue eyes drew glances, but his expression was distant, as if he were calculating the minutes until he could leave. He'd come for the groom, an old college buddy, but the laughter and clinking glasses felt like a foreign language. His life was a series of boardrooms and late-night emails, a fortress of success built to bury the regrets that still haunted him. 5 years ago, he'd let love slip through his fingers, caving to his family's expectations. Expectations that demanded a certain kind of partner, a certain kind of life. He'd buried the pain, but tonight it stirred, restless. The mother guided her twins through the crowd, her steps measured, her posture a silent declaration of belonging. She caught Lena's eye near the dance floor, where the bride glowed in a cascade of white silk. Lena waved, her smile warm and genuine, a stark contrast to the guarded expressions around her. You made it, Lena called, rushing over to envelop her friend in a hug. The twins squealed, wrapping their arms around Lena's legs, their joy a small rebellion against the room's undercurrent of judgment. I wouldn't miss it, the mother said, her voice softening. Lena knelt to the twins, whispering something that made them giggle, then stood and squeezed her friend's hand. You're my rock, Lena said. Always have been. As Lena was pulled back to her guests, the mother felt another pair of eyes on her. A man in a crisp tuxedo, his hair graying at the temples, approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's admirable, you know, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Raising twins on your own, especially in your situation. The words hung heavy, the phrase your situation, a coded jab at her race, her single motherhood, her audacity to exist in this space. She met his gaze, unflinching. My situation is my strength, she replied, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. The man blinked, caught off guard, then muttered something about the cake and retreated. She exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her daughter's hair. She'd learned long ago to armor herself against these moments, but each one left a mark. The twins, oblivious to the tension, tugged her toward a table laden with desserts. The boy reached for a chocolate-dipped strawberry, his small fingers leaving a smudge of jam on his sleeve. Look, Mommy, it's like dinosaur food, he said, grinning. She laughed, the sound of brief release, and handed him a napkin. Dinosaurs don't eat jam, silly, she teased, but her eyes scanned the room, always alert. She'd built a life for them, coding boot camps to pay the rent, bedtime stories about inventors and heroes who look like them, a tiny apartment filled with love. But places like this, with their polished surfaces and hidden thorns, reminded her how hard she had to fight to make that life enough. The entrepreneur, still nursing his whiskey, felt a pull he couldn't explain. His gaze drifted across the room, landing on the mother and her twins. Something about her, the way she held herself, proud yet guarded, stirred a memory he'd tried to forget. 5 years ago, he'd loved a woman with that same fire, a woman whose laughter had once been his home. He'd let her go, pressured by his family's insistence on standards, their thinly veiled warnings about cultural fit. The regret had gnawed at him ever since, a quiet ache he drowned in work. Now seeing her, his heart lurched. Was it really her? He took a step forward, then stopped, noticing the children. The boy dipped his strawberry in jam, a habit so familiar it felt like looking in a mirror. The girl's furrowed brow, the way she tilted her head when curious. It was like seeing his own childhood photos come to life. A waiter passed by, balancing a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and muttered to a colleague, "They shouldn't let kids run around in a place this nice." The words were quiet, but the mother heard them, her jaw tightening. She pulled her twins closer, shielding them from the judgment that seemed to follow them everywhere. She'd faced it at parent-teacher conferences, where teachers assumed her son's energy was disruptive before giving him a chance. At the park, where other mothers watched her daughter's curls with a mix of fascination and distance. In her own workplace, where her code was scrutinized more than her peers. She was tired, but she was fierce, a lioness protecting her cubs in a world that too often saw them as less. The entrepreneur moved closer, his steps hesitant, as if approaching a flame that could burn him. The mother turned, their eyes meeting across the crowded room. Time seemed to pause, the chatter fading to a dull hum. Her face was a storm of emotions. Shock, recognition, a flicker of pain quickly buried under resolve. His breath caught, the whiskey glass nearly slipping from his hand. "Is that you?" he said, his voice barely audible over the jazz quartet. The girl looked up, her eyes bright and curious. "Mommy, who's he?" she asked, pointing at him. The boy, still clutching his dinosaur, tilted his head, his brow furrowing in a way that sent a jolt through the man's chest. It was a gesture he knew too well, one he'd seen in the mirror 1,000 times. The mother's gaze hardened, but her voice was soft for her children. "Just someone Mommy used to know," she said, guiding them toward Lena's table. The entrepreneur stood frozen, his mind racing. The boy's jam-covered fingers, the girl's thoughtful frown. They were pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed. He wanted to follow, to ask, to understand, but something held him back. The weight of 5 years, of choices made and chances lost, pressed against him. The ballroom sparkled on, oblivious to the collision of past and present. But for the mother and the man, the world had just shifted. The ballroom sparkled on, its golden glow a cruel contrast to the collision of past and present that left the mother and the man frozen, their worlds teetering on the edge of a truth neither was ready to face. As she guided her twins toward Lena's table, her words, "just someone Mommy used to know," hung in the air like a half-drawn breath, sharp with unspoken history. The entrepreneur stood rooted, his mind a storm of questions, the boy's jam-smeared fingers and the girl's furrowed brow echoing in his memory like ghosts from a life he'd buried. Outside, under a canopy of fairy lights strung across the hotel's garden, the night air was cool, laced with the scent of jasmine and distant cigarette smoke. The mother led him to a quiet corner, where the hum of the jazz quartet faded to a whisper. The twins scampered nearby, chasing fireflies that flickered like tiny stars against the velvet dark. Their laughter, bright and unburdened, was a fragile shield against the weight of the conversation to come. She stood tall, her emerald dress catching the light, her eyes a fortress of resolve and pain. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low but steady, each word carved from years of carrying the world alone. He nodded, his throat tight, the whiskey glass long forgotten in his hand. He glanced at the twins, the boy now holding a firefly in his cupped hands, the girl whispering secrets to her stuffed dinosaur. Their features, those curls, that stubborn tilt of the chin, felt like a mirror held up to his own past. "They're mine, aren't they?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking the question aloud might shatter the fragile hope it carried. Her silence was deafening, her gaze locked on her children, a lioness guarding her cubs. Finally she spoke, her words measured but raw. "I tried to tell you. 5 years ago I called. I wrote. Your family made it clear I wasn't welcome in your world." Her voice cracked, betraying the hurt she'd buried beneath her strength. He flinched, the memory of those years flooding back. He'd been 25, ambitious, caught in the web of his family's expectations. Marry someone who fit their polished legacy, someone who wouldn't complicate their social standing. He'd loved her fiercely, her laughter a melody he'd once lived for, but he'd let their warnings, couched in phrases like different backgrounds and long-term fit, drive a wedge between them. He'd chosen silence, cowardice, thinking it would protect her from their judgment. Now standing before her, he saw the cost. "I didn't know," he said, the words hollow even to his own ears. "I swear I didn't know." She crossed her arms, her posture a shield. "You didn't know because you didn't want to. Your mother answered my call. She told me I'd ruin your future, that I wasn't the right kind for your family." Her voice trembled with the memory of that conversation, the cold precision of his mother's voice cutting deeper than any insult. "She said my children would be a burden, a problem you didn't need. I chose them over your world." Her eyes flicked to the twins, who were now giggling as the boy tried to show the girl his captured firefly. The sight anchored her, but it didn't erase the pain. A guest wandered near the garden's edge, a woman in a sleek red dress, her glance lingering on the mother and her children. "They're so spirited," she said to a companion, her tone dripping with condescension, as if the twins' joy was somehow too loud, too unrefined for this setting. The mother's jaw tightened, but she didn't turn. She'd heard variations of this before, at the grocery store, where a cashier remarked that her kids were so articulate for their kind, at the library where a patron suggested she keep them quieter while they read. Each comment was a pebble, small but heavy, piling up over years of raising her twins in a world that judged them before knowing them. He followed her gaze to the twins, his heart twisting. The boy's careful fingers, cradling the firefly, mirrored his own childhood habit of collecting small treasures. Rocks, coins, anything that caught the light. The girl's thoughtful frown as she studied her dinosaur was his own, a gesture his mother had once teased him for. "They have your eyes," he said softly, almost to himself. "Your stubborn chin." She didn't respond. Her silence was a wall he didn't know how to climb. He took a step closer, his voice urgent. Why didn't you try harder to reach me? After that call, after my mother, why didn't you fight?" Her laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. "Fight? I was 22, pregnant, and alone. I fought every day to keep food on the table, to teach myself to code while they napped, to make sure they never felt the weight of the world's judgment. I didn't have the energy to fight your family too." She paused, her eyes searching his face for the man she'd once loved, the one who'd promised her forever before letting her go. "You chose your path. I chose mine. To protect them." She nodded toward the twins who were now lying on the grass, pointing at the stars, their voices a soft melody of wonder. He ran a hand through his hair, the weight of her words sinking in. He remembered those final months of their relationship, the late nights he'd spent chasing deals, the dinners he'd missed, the phone calls he'd let go to voicemail. His family's voices had been loud, his mother's warnings about image, his sister's subtle digs about compatibility. He'd told himself he was protecting her by letting her go, sparing her the pressure of his world. But now, seeing her strength, her fierce love for her children, he saw the lie. "I was weak," he admitted, his voice raw. "I let them convince me you'd be better off without me. But I never stopped thinking about you." She studied him, her eyes a storm of doubt and memory. She remembered their nights together, sharing dreams under a different sky, his promises of a future where love trumped ambition. But she also remembered the silence that followed, the way his absence had left her to face the world alone. "Thinking about me didn't help me when I was changing diapers at 3 a.m., she said. "It didn't help when I was proving myself in a tech world that assumed I didn't belong." Her voice softened, but not with forgiveness. "You don't get to walk back into our lives because you're sorry now." A firefly escaped the boy's hands, darting into the night. He laughed, chasing it, his sister trailing behind, their joy a stark contrast to the heaviness between the adults. The mother watched them, her heart aching with the love that had carried her through every sleepless night, every judgmental glance. She'd built a world for them, coding projects that paid the bills, stories of inventors who defied odds, a home where their laughter drowned out the world's noise. But now this man, with his familiar eyes and regrets, threatened to unravel it all. Another guest passed by, a man in a pinstripe suit, his voice low but audible. "Those kids are cute, but they don't really fit in here, do they?" The mother's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn. She was used to it, the casual remarks that questioned her children's place, their worth. At the park, a mother had once asked if her twins were adopted, assuming she couldn't be their biological mother. At work, a manager had praised her surprising coding skills, as if her talent was an exception. She'd learned to let the comments slide, but each one was a reminder of the world her children would inherit. The entrepreneur took a step closer, his voice pleading. "I need to know them. I need to know if there's a chance to make this right." She shook her head, her eyes fierce. "This isn't about you. It's about them. If you want to be in their lives, it's not enough to feel guilty. You have to show up, not just tonight, but every day." Her words were a challenge, a line drawn in the sand. The twins ran back, the boy holding out his empty hands. "It flew away," he said, his voice bright with wonder. The girl tugged at her mother's dress. "Can he eat cake with us, Mommy?" she asked, pointing at the man. He knelt to her level, his heart pounding. "I'd like that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The boy tilted his head, offering a firefly's glow in his palm. "Look, it's magic," he said. The man smiled, a crack in his polished exterior. "It is," he said, glancing at the mother, hoping for a sign. She looked away, her face unreadable, but her hand rested gently on her daughter's shoulder. "We'll see about the cake," she said, her voice soft but firm, leaving the future uncertain but open. A fragile thread stretched between them. The garden's fairy lights flickered like a promise, fragile yet defiant, as the mother's words, "We'll see about the cake," hung between them, a delicate thread stretched taut by years of pain and possibility. She guided her twins back toward the ballroom, her hand steady on her daughter's shoulder, her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to soften under the weight of the man's plea. He followed, his steps heavy, the boy's firefly and the girl's innocent question about cake echoing in his mind like a call to something he'd lost long ago. Inside, the ballroom pulsed with life, a kaleidoscope of silk gowns and clinking glasses, the jazz quartet weaving a melody that felt too cheerful for the storm brewing within. The mother steered her twins toward a corner table, where the towering wedding cake stood like a monument to joy she couldn't quite feel. Her daughter tugged at her dress, eyes wide with anticipation. "Is it time for cake now, Mommy?" she asked, her voice a bright spark against the room's polished hum. The boy, clutching his dinosaur, pointed at the sugar flowers. "They look like stars," he said, his grin infectious. She smiled, kneeling to adjust his bow tie, her heart swelling with the love that had carried her through every challenge. "Soon, my love," she said, her voice soft but firm, a shield against the eyes that followed them. The crowd parted slightly as she stood, revealing a sea of faces, some curious, others guarded, a few openly judgmental. A woman in a sapphire gown leaned toward her friend, her voice low but sharp. "It's bold to bring children to an event like this, don't you think? Especially them." The word "them" was a dagger, slicing through the pretense of civility, implying the twins' mixed heritage made them out of place. The mother's spine stiffened, but she kept her gaze on her children, refusing to let the comment pierce her armor. She'd faced this before, at the pediatrician's office, where a nurse assumed her twins' energy was too much for a single mother. At the community center, where a volunteer praised their surprising manners, as if their upbringing was an anomaly. Each remark was a reminder of the world's quick judgments, but she'd learned to let them slide, focusing on the life she'd built for her children. The man trailed behind, his navy suit now slightly rumpled, his mind reeling from the garden's revelations. Her words about his mother's rejection, her years of struggle, had cracked open a truth he'd avoided for too long. He scanned the room, catching sight of his own family near the bar, their expressions a mix of unease and disdain. His mother, elegant in a silver dress, her diamond necklace glinting like ice, met his eyes with a warning glance. His sister, poised in a cream blazer, whispered to a guest, her words inaudible, but her smirk unmistakable. He knew what they thought of the mother, of her twins, knew the coded language they'd used years ago to dismiss her as unsuitable. The shame of his silence back then burned in his chest, urging him forward. A server approached the mother, offering a tray of canapes. "For the kids?" he asked, his tone polite, but his glance lingering on her with a hint of scrutiny, as if questioning her presence. She nodded, her smile tight. "Thank you," she said, handing a small pastry to each twin. The boy nibbled his, leaving crumbs on his dinosaur, while the girl savored hers, her eyes darting around the room. The mother watched them, her heart a fortress of love and vigilance. She'd taught herself to code in stolen moments, built a career in a tech world that often overlooked her, all to give her twins a life where they could dream without limits. But here, in this glittering cage, she felt the walls closing in. The man's mother approached, her steps deliberate, her smile a mask of courtesy. "My dear," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "it's so brave of you to bring your children to such an occasion." The word brave was a barb, implying recklessness, a suggestion that the twins' presence was a disruption. The mother met her gaze unflinching. "They're my family," she said simply, her tone a quiet rebuke. "They belong wherever I am." The older woman's smile faltered, her eyes flicking to the twins with a barely concealed frown. "Of course," she said, retreating, but the air around them grew heavier, charged with unspoken tension. The man watched, his fists clenching at his sides. He recognized that tone, that look. He had heard it years ago when his mother spoke of standards and image, dismissing the woman he loved as a liability. He'd been too weak then, too caught in ambition and family pressure to challenge her. Now the sight of her condescension ignited something within him, a spark of defiance he hadn't felt in years. He moved closer to the mother, his presence a silent apology, but she didn't acknowledge him, her focus on her twins as they chattered about the cake. His sister joined the fray, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This isn't really the place for complications," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to turn. The word complications landed like a stone, its meaning clear. The twins, with their mixed heritage, were an inconvenience, a blemish on the event's polished surface. A few guests nodded, their murmurs a chorus of agreement. Mixed kids always have it harder, don't they? One said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. The mother's hands trembled, but she stood taller, her voice cutting through the noise. My children are not complications, she said, each word a bullet. They're the best thing I've ever done. The room quieted for a moment, her strength a force that demanded respect, even from those who refused to give it. The man felt the air shift, the weight of her words pulling him to a crossroads. He could stay silent, as he had years ago, or he could act. He stepped forward, his voice rising above the murmurs, clear and unshakable. Enough, he said, his eyes locked on his family. These are my children. The ballroom seemed to freeze, glasses pausing mid-clink, the jazz quartet's notes hanging in the air. His mother's face paled, her diamonds suddenly dull. This is the woman I loved, he continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest, and lost because I was too weak to stand up to you. He turned to the mother, his gaze pleading. I'm done letting you define my family. The crowd was a mix of shock and curiosity, some faces softening, others hardening with judgment. A guest whispered to her partner, "This is going to be a scandal," her tone almost gleeful. The mother stood still, her eyes locked on the man, searching for sincerity amidst the chaos. She'd heard promises before, felt their weight dissolve under pressure. Words don't fix 5 years, she said, her voice low but piercing, cutting through the room's tension. You can't just claim them and walk away. Being a father isn't a moment, it's every single day. Her words were a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at his feet, her twins' futures hanging in the balance. The girl's voice broke the silence, small but clear. Are you our daddy? She asked, her lavender dress swaying as she stepped forward, her eyes wide with hope. The boy echoed, clutching his dinosaur. Daddy? The words were a tidal wave, crashing through the man's defenses. He knelt, his suit forgotten as his knees touched the polished floor, tears brimming in his eyes. I'd like to be, he whispered, his voice raw, arms opening as if afraid to hope. The twins hesitated, glancing at their mother, then ran to him, their small bodies colliding with his in a hug that was both a wound and a salve. The mother watched, her heart torn between the warmth of their embrace and the fear of trusting again. The room remained hushed, the weight of the moment settling over the guests like dust. Some looked away, uncomfortable with the rawness. Others stared, captivated by the unfolding drama. The mother's gaze softened for a fleeting second, but her voice held firm. We'll see what you do with this, she said, her words directed at him alone. A quiet vow that this was only the beginning. She took her twins' hands, guiding them back toward the cake, their laughter a fragile melody against the room's stunned silence. He stood watching them, the echo of their voices, Daddy ringing in his ears, a call to prove himself beyond this night. The echo of the twins' laughter, a fragile melody against the ballroom's stunned silence, lingered as the mother led them toward the cake, her hand steady but her heart wrestling with the man's raw declaration. His words, Daddy, still rang in his ears, a call to prove himself beyond that night. As she guided her children through the crowd, her steps were a quiet vow. Any future with him would be earned, not given. Weeks later, the world outside the wedding's gilded walls felt both smaller and heavier. The mother stood at the edge of a school playground, her emerald scarf fluttering in the breeze, watching her twins race across the grass. The boy, dinosaur tucked under his arm, chased his sister, whose lavender backpack bounced with every step. Their laughter was a lighthouse, guiding her through the uncertainty of what came next. She'd returned to her routine, coding late into the night, weaving stories of inventors and dreamers for her children, guarding their joy against a world quick to judge. But now there he was. He appeared at the school gate, his usual tailored suit replaced by a simple jacket, a backpack slung over his shoulder stuffed with snacks and coloring books. The twins spotted him, their faces lighting up. It's you, the girl shouted, sprinting toward him, her brother close behind. He knelt, his smile tentative but warm, offering a bag of gummy bears. Thought you might like thee, he said, his voice softer than the boardroom commands he was used to. The mother watched from a distance, her arms crossed, her eyes searching for cracks in his sincerity. She'd seen promises before, felt their weight dissolve under the pressure of ambition, but today he was here, present in a way she hadn't expected. A parent nearby, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, glanced at him and the twins, her lips pursing. It's surprising to see him here, with kids like that, she murmured to another mother, her tone laced with the assumption that he didn't belong in their world. The mother caught the words, her jaw tightening, but she didn't flinch. She'd heard it all. Co-workers who questioned her place in tech, assuming her skills were a fluke. Neighbors who raised eyebrows when her twins played too loudly. She met the woman's gaze, her silence a rebuke, then turned back to her children, her strength a shield against the world's small cruelties. He stood, brushing grass from his knees, and approached her. "I'm trying," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "I know it's not enough. Not yet." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Trying isn't showing up," she said. "Showing up is every day, not just when it feels good." Her words were firm, a line drawn from years of carrying her family alone. She'd taught herself to code in stolen hours, built a life where her twins could dream without limits, all while navigating a world that often saw her as less. His presence now was a start, but trust was a road built with actions, not intentions. At home in their small apartment, the twins sprawled on the living room floor, their crayons scattered across a coffee table. He sat with them, his tie loosened, attempting to draw a dinosaur under the boy's enthusiastic guidance. "No, it needs bigger teeth," the boy insisted, giggling as he corrected the sketch. The girl handed him a purple crayon, her eyes serious. "You have to make it sparkly," she said, as if it were a universal truth. He laughed, a sound rusty but genuine, and complied, his hand unsteady but willing. The mother watched from the kitchen, stirring a pot of macaroni, her heart caught between caution and a flicker of hope. She'd spent years being everything: mother, provider, protector. Could he fit into the world she'd built? Later at a quiet dinner, the table was set with mismatched plates, and the twins chattered about their day. He listened, his phone silent in his pocket, a small but seismic shift from the man who once lived for notifications. "Tell me about your dinosaur," he said to the boy, who launched into a story about a TT. "Rex who could fly," the girl chimed in, describing a superhero who saved sparkly animals. The mother watched, her fork paused midair, noting the way he leaned in, his attention unbroken. She remembered nights when his absence had been louder than her twins' laughter, when his ambition had left her alone. Now his silence was different, focused, present. A neighbor stopped by, dropping off a borrowed book, her glance lingering on him. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, her tone polite but edged with curiosity, as if his presence in their modest apartment was an anomaly. The mother smiled tightly, her response curt. "He's visiting," she said, closing the door. She'd grown used to the subtle digs, the teacher who assumed her twins needed extra help before meeting them, the colleague who praised her unexpected leadership in meetings. Each was a reminder of the world's low expectations, but she'd turned them into fuel, coding her way to stability, building a home where her children thrived. He stayed after dinner, helping the twins brush their teeth, stumbling through a bedtime story about a pirate who found treasure and kindness. The boy yawned, clutching his dinosaur, while the girl whispered, "You're funny." He smiled, his chest tight with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. As the twins drifted to sleep, he joined the mother in the living room, the air heavy with unspoken questions. "I want to be here," he said, his voice earnest. "Not just tonight, but for them. For you." She studied him, her eyes a storm of doubt and possibility. "I don't need saving," she said. "I need you to show up consistently, no matter what." Weeks turned to months, and his presence became a quiet rhythm. School pickups, weekend park visits, moments carved out between his boardroom battles. He learned to braid the girl's hair, his fingers clumsy but determined, earning her giggles when he got it wrong. He built a Lego castle with the boy, marveling at his imagination. Each moment was a brick in a foundation he was desperate to build. But the world outside their small circle didn't soften. At a school event, a teacher approached, her smile overly bright. It's so nice to see their father involved, especially given their circumstances, she said. The word circumstances, a coded jab at their mixed heritage. The mother's gaze was steel. Their circumstances are love, she said, her voice cutting through the pretense. The turning point came at a community center, where they launched a scholarship fund for Black children in STEM. The room was modest, far from the ballroom's opulence, filled with parents and kids who looked like her. She stood at a podium, her twins at her side, her voice steady. We can't choose our skin, she said, but we can choose how we love, how we show up. He stood beside her, holding the boy's hand. The girl perched on his shoulders, her laughter a spark against the room's warmth. He'd poured his resources into the fund, but it was her vision, her fire, that gave it life. The crowd applauded, their cheers a quiet rebellion against a world that too often dismissed them. As they stepped down, the boy tugged at his sleeve. Can we get ice cream? He asked, his eyes bright. The girl chimed in, with sprinkles. He laughed, a sound raw and free, glancing at the mother. Sprinkles it is, he said, his eyes seeking her approval. She nodded, a small smile breaking through, her heart easing just enough to let hope take root. They walked out together, the twins' chatter filling the air, their family a fragile but growing constellation. The world's judgments hadn't vanished, but in their shared moments, ice cream runs, bedtime stories, quiet dinners, they were building something stronger, something real. As the twins' laughter fades into the night, their family's fragile constellation shines brighter, a testament to love's power to heal and defy judgment. What would you do in their place? Stand tall against prejudice or fight to prove your presence? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice adds to this story's heartbeat. At Soul Spark Stories, we're grateful for you, our listeners, who join us in these tales of courage and connection. Your support lights the way for more narratives that remind us what matters most. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell to never miss a story that might shift your perspective. Where are you listening from today? Let us know below and take a moment to share this journey with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep your heart open to the quiet victories of showing up. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.